Welcome back to the Pro Ticker Podcast, your Thursday morning edition covering major financial magazine headlines, everyone. So it's Thursday, May 15th, 2025, and today, well, we're doing our deep dive, looking at the big financial stories you flagged for us, pulling from, CNBC, Reuters, Bloomberg.
Right, MarketWatch, Yahoo Finance.
The usual sources.
Exactly. And the goal today is really to connect some of these dots, try and get a clearer picture of what's actually shaping the economy right now.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, how you can see the threads connecting, say, global trade trends and then very specific company news.
Absolutely. And one big theme seems to be these ongoing, well, trade tensions and how policies are shifting.
And the ripple effects, right, creating both challenges, but also maybe some opportunities in different sectors.
Okay, so let's start with the bigger picture then. There's this piece from CNBC about APEC.
Ah, yes, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Group.
Right, 21 economies. And they're anticipating a pretty significant slowdown in growth, projecting, what was it, a drop to 2.6% in 2025. That's it, yeah. Down from 3.6% the year before. That's quite a deceleration.
Definitely. So what's driving that, according to CNBC?
Well, the article really pins it on trade tensions. Carlos Kuriyama, he's the director of the APEC Policy Support Unit, basically said the current environment, tariff hikes, retaliation, these non-tariff barriers, it's just not conducive to trade.
So it's not just fewer goods moving.
No, it's more than that.
Yeah.
It's disrupting supply chains, businesses having to find new routes, maybe more expensive ones, and that ultimately hits productivity across the board.
Kuriyama also mentioned the uncertainty factor, didn't he? That seems key.
Huge. It's not just the tariffs that are already there, but the fear of what might come next. It makes businesses, well, hesitant.
So they hold back on investments, delay new products.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
Creates a real climate of caution. And you see that echoed elsewhere in the CNBC piece.
Like from the trade officials they quoted.
Right. Former Canadian Trade Minister Mary Yang, she was on Squawk Box Asia, apparently.
Yeah.
She talked about her experience with the U.S. steel and aluminum tariffs on Canada.
Ah, I remember that.
And just emphasized how crucial predictable trade agreements are. Businesses need that stability for long-term planning. You can't plan if the goalposts keep moving.
Makes total sense. Governments kind of owe that stability to their economies, as she put it.
Though there was a slightly more positive note, too. The Malaysian Trade Minister, Tengku Zafrul Aziz,
Okay.
he welcomed the recent sort of de-escalation between the U.S. and China and stressed, again, the need for a rules-based system.
So desire for stability there.
Definitely, especially among ASEAN nations.
Yeah.
But Mary Yang also gave a pretty stark warning in that CNBC report
About what?
about the risk of the world splitting into, say, two big trading blocs. She mentioned a potential 7% hit to global GDP if that happened.
Wow, 7%. That's enormous. How would that even happen?
Well, think about losing efficiency, right? Less specialization, companies duplicating efforts, maybe less innovation because there's less global collaboration. It adds up.
Really puts these trade talks into perspective. Okay, let's zoom in on the U.S.-China situation then. We've got reports from CNBC, Bloomberg, Yahoo Finance.
Yeah, and the CNBC Daily Open specifically called out how past tariffs hit tech stocks, didn't they? Like Apple, Nvidia.
Because their supply chains are so global.
Exactly. Shows how these big policies hit specific companies hard. But what's interesting now, Bloomberg reported this, is China's putting a temporary pause on some export controls.
A pause on what exactly?
On these dual-use export curbs,
Yeah.
targeting 28 U.S. firms. It's a 90-day pause.
Dual use, meaning civilian and military applications.
Correct. So exporting them is always sensitive. This pause looks like a bit of a goodwill gesture, maybe, especially since they had announced restrictions earlier, including on some rare earths.
A 90-day window. And Yahoo Finance mentioned tariff changes too, right? Big ones.
Pretty dramatic, yeah. U.S. tariffs on most Chinese exports reportedly dropping from like 145% down to 30%, and China cutting theirs from 125% to 10%.
Whoa. Even if it's temporary, that's a massive shift.
Huge implications. And CNN reported that retailers are expected to basically rush orders from China during these 90 days. Front-loading cargo, they called it.
Trying to beat the clock before tariffs potentially snap back.
Pretty much. Get the goods in while the window's open.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because Maersk, the shipping giant, told CNN they'd seen volumes drop significantly before this because of all the tariff uncertainty.
As much as 40%, wasn't it? Like the trade winds just stopped blowing.
Exactly. So now, economist Peter Bookfart told CNN he expects a surge in ordering.
Which means?
Probably higher transportation costs, right? everyone scrambling at once.
Hmm.
Could create bottlenecks, maybe even some short-term inflation.
And CNN noted West Coast ports were already seeing volumes drop initially because of the shipping lag time.
Right. It takes time for those earlier decisions to show up in the port data.
But even with these temporary cuts, the overall tariff levels are still much higher than they used to be.
Oh, definitely. And the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, CNN quoted them, they're still concerned. They're pushing again for exemptions,
Yeah.
especially for small businesses who get hit hardest by these costs.
Yeah, it's never simple, is it? The impacts are always uneven.
Never. Okay, shifting gears a bit. Let's talk specific companies. Nvidia's been in the news.
Ah, yeah, the stock recovery. CNBC Daily Open and Yahoo Finance both covered that. Back in positive territory for the year now.
That's right. Climbed after that big news about selling, what was it, over 18,000 AI chips to Saudi Arabia.
Huge deal. And that makes Nvidia the third Magnificent Seven stock back in the green for the year, CNBC said. Quite something, given the tech headwinds.
That really highlights the intense demand for their AI hardware. But there's maybe a strategic angle, too.
How so?
Well, CNBC hinted it could be a link to broader diplomatic stuff, maybe even President Trump's work in the Middle East. It suggests AI infrastructure demand is growing fast outside the usual places.
Diversifying their market, maybe? Interesting. And speaking of big deals and Trump, Boeing.
Yes, the Qatar Airways deal. Massive order, potentially up to 210 jets, happened during Trump's state visit.
Yeah.
Covered everywhere, CNBC, MarketWatch, CNN.
And Trump apparently called it Boeing's biggest order ever.
He did. And it's a huge boost for Boeing. Remember, the CNBC Daily Open mentioned they haven't actually posted a profit since 2018.
Right. So an order like this is incredibly significant for their stability, shows how diplomacy and big business can intertwine.
Absolutely. Now let's look at Apple. Another interaction with President Trump reported by CNBC, Bloomberg, MarketWatch.
This was about manufacturing in India, right? Trump telling Tim Cook he wants more production in the U.S. instead.
Exactly. It fits Trump's consistent theme, bring manufacturing back home. And Apple, of course, has been ramping up in India, aiming for maybe 25% of iPhone output there.
Diversifying away from China.
That's the strategy. And MarketWatch noted Trump claimed India offered to drop tariffs on U.S. goods to zero.
Zero. That would be a big deal if true.
It would. But then you have the other side, the cost. CNBC pointed out estimates suggesting making an iPhone in the U.S. could cost anywhere from $1,500 to $3,500.
Per phone. Ouch! That's a huge jump.
Massive. It really throws the feasibility of large-scale U.S. production for consumer electronics into question, doesn't it? Highlights those complex trade-offs.
For sure. Okay, let's shift to energy. Oil prices saw some movement. CNBC and Reuters reported on this.
Yeah, sharp fall, actually. Mostly driven by expectations around a potential U.S.-Iran nuclear deal.
The thinking being a deal lifts sanctions, Iran exports more oil, global supply goes up.
Precisely. And President Trump's comments in Doha, saying they were getting close to a deal, that just added fuel to that fire, so to speak. Geopolitics moving markets in real time.
Definitely.
And then compounding that, Reuters reported a surprise build in U.S. crude inventories, more supply than expected domestically.
So concerns about oversupply pushing prices down. Got it.
Okay, how about antitrust? Yahoo Finance had a piece on the administration's stance.
What was the main takeaway there?
Well, the DOJ's principal antitrust deputy, Roger Alford, used some strong language, said they're committed to aggressively pursuing illegal competition. Very serious, was the quote, I think.
And they mentioned the ongoing big cases, Google, Meta.
Yep, efforts to break up Google, force Meta to sell Instagram and WhatsApp, those battles continue.
Anything new on their approach?
Alfred mentioned wanting to bring back consent decrees and merger reviews, sort of a way to settle cases with conditions. And he emphasized focusing on industries hitting average Americans: housing, transport, insurance, entertainment.
Interesting. More consumer-focused. Okay, let's connect back to the real-world impact of tariffs. CNBC looked at aluminum, CNN at consumer spending.
Right, and the aluminum story is fascinating. Despite tariffs on imports, production isn't really shifting back to the U.S.
Why not?
According to Hydro's CFO, Trond Olaf Christofferson, it's about power costs. The U.S. lacks competitively priced long-term power, especially with demand rising from things like AI data centers.
So even with tariffs, it's just not economical for aluminum producers to set up shop here.
It seems that way. Christofferson basically suggested that tariffs will just mean higher prices for U.S. consumers. And CNBC noted a big gap opening up between U.S. and European aluminum premiums because of U.S. policy.
Putting U.S. manufacturers using aluminum at a disadvantage.
Exactly. And on the consumer side, that KPMG survey CNN reported, it shows people are changing habits.
Due to tariffs and just general economic uncertainty.
Yeah. Delaying big purchases, like cars, cutting back generally, big and small items, and becoming more hesitant about taking on debt.
So a potential dampening effect on domestic demand then, an unintended consequence perhaps.
Could be. Which leads us nicely into broader market stuff, interest rates, the dollar. MarketWatch and CNBC covered this.
What was the interesting point there?
Well, Torsten Slok from Apollo noted in MarketWatch that based on interest rate differences, the euro should arguably be weaker against the dollar than it is. The dollar isn't as strong as those differentials suggest.
Meaning other factors are involved.
Potentially. ING's Chris Turner, also in MarketWatch, has been talking about de-dollarization, especially since Trump's tariff talks back in April. The idea that maybe investors are starting to diversify away from the dollar.
Is there evidence of that?
MarketWatch pointed to big international buying of Japanese stocks and bonds in April as one possible sign. Plus, there are those ongoing worries about the U.S. deficit, the spread between U.S. Treasuries and German bonds.
Which hasn't really narrowed.
Right. Some are even speculating about maybe putting currency agreements into future trade deals.
Meanwhile, CNBC said Treasury yields dipped slightly.
Yeah, investors seem to be waiting for more inflation data this week. PPI, retail sales, jobless claims. All that will give more clues about the U.S. economy's direction.
Okay, almost there. Just a couple more headlines. Reuters reported China's reaction to U.S. export controls on Huawei's AI chips.
Yes, strong reaction. Accused the U.S. of abusing export control measures. Warned about global semiconductor supply chain stability. Said China would take steps to protect its companies.
Standard rhetoric, or something more.
Hard to say for sure, but the tensions in the tech space are clearly still very high.
And finally, something a bit odd. CNN Business reported on Elon Musk's Grok AI.
Yeah, apparently it brought up the topic of white genocide in response to unrelated questions, which is definitely concerning. Raises flags about potential biases or unexpected behavior in these AI systems.
Definitely something to watch. Okay, so wrapping this all up.
What we see is this incredibly interconnected picture, right? Trade tensions ripple outwards, hitting growth forecasts, company decisions, consumer wallets, even currency markets.
Yeah, and policy choices, especially on trade, they have these really complex, sometimes unexpected consequences far beyond what was maybe intended.
Absolutely. Understanding these connections, how one headline links to another, it's just crucial for making sense of the economic landscape today.
Couldn't agree more. Well, that's our deep dive into the financial headlines for today. We'll see you all tomorrow morning with new headlines from major financial magazines.